Good afternoon and welcome to another ABiQ webinar. This time we're looking at the Egypt project outlook, and I'm delighted to have with me John Rafat, who is the Managing Director of GLEEDS based in Cairo. And I'd like to welcome John. John, maybe if you would like to introduce yourself as well as GLEEDS and just in terms of context, what you do in Cairo and your involvement in the project business.
Thank you, Emil. It's a pleasure actually being in this webinar. Hi, I'm John Rafat. I'm a director and heading the cost management in GLEEDS Egypt. I'm a chartered quant surveyor, member of Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. GLEEDS Egypt is now established since like 11 years, with GLEEDS worldwide being there for the last 140 years. GLEEDS Egypt is providing cost management, project management, technical due diligence, facility management, and other aspects. Mainly, we are an international construction consultancy where we support the construction project from inception to completion, and we feel that we are also flexible and have a flexible approach to support the clients as needed to deliver their projects to the best quality within the time frames specified.
Excellent. So tell me just a matter of scale, what is your order book value or the project, the total value of project you're involved in at the moment? Because we know, and I'll hopefully show it a bit later as well, Egypt is at the moment the largest construction market in Africa. So maybe if you could just give us some numbers, I mean, just wow us.
Okay, currently we are working with billions, and in the pipeline there is projects which I would say in the range of 200 billion Egyptian pound. So it's actually a massive project, and it's, as you said, it's a rapid market now, moving very fast with huge growth potentials and actually huge growth opportunities.
Excellent. Right, so we are going to do a bit of a slideshow just to go through some numbers and statistics. I'll take the opportunity to obviously introduce ABiQ as well in terms of what we do. And maybe just, there we go. Hopefully you can see my screen, John.
Yeah, I can see your screen here.
Excellent. So Egypt project outlook. So agenda for today, we've already introduced John and GLEEDS, and I'll quickly run through ABiQ and what it is we are doing. We will briefly look at Egypt's economy and drivers for growth, what is driving the massive investment in that market. Then we're going to look a bit into details in terms of the projects market. It's looking at what are the main sectors, main developments, projects by status, who are the top developers and the top contractors involved in that market. And hopefully we'll be able to explore a bit more in terms of, where does the funding come from and, who's investing in that market. And then perhaps just doing a bit of a benchmark just to show the true size of that market compared to the rest of the African or Middle East Africa context. So just ABiQ roughly. So we are a market research organization doing online subscriptions to business intelligence. We have, as you can see, close to 2,500 active projects valued at over $4 trillion, which is close to double the African total continent's GDP actually. We have got more than 2 million data points in projects, and we have details of more than 24,000 people involved in projects across our database. Right, Egypt's economy. It is the third largest economy in Africa. So you've got Nigeria, South Africa, and then Egypt. It is the second most populous country in Africa, with over 100 million people now. Looking at its debt, I think that's one of the challenges. It did manage to reduce its debt by 20% over the last 3 years. However, that total debt is close to 100% of its GDP. We can see there, like Suez Canal revenue increased recently 16%. That's just over the last year, so that's April numbers. And then foreign assets declined by 13%. But foreign liabilities went up by 2%. So just what is your outlook, John? I mean, I know you guys obviously look at the economy and how does this all come together in terms of from a project and investment point of view. So Why would you say is Egypt going on this massive expansion drive? What are the main drivers behind this?
Okay, we started with a couple of revolutions of the last year. So the economy growth was very slow at this point. And now as a government objective, since I would say the last 5 to 6 years is basically to build a new Egypt. There is a vision now to have more investment within the country, facilitates these investments as much as possible, get more investors from different countries to be involved. The vision is to have a bigger and better Egypt from the perspective of everyone, and to restore Egypt's place in the African market and the Middle East market in particular as a lead company and lead developers within different sectors. We are actually increasing the tourism sector. We're focusing on the new capital where there is a lot of potential opportunities to invest. We started the iconic tower, which is a big skyscraper, which is something new to the Egyptian market with this height. We have built before things up to, let's say, 35 to 40 stories, but going beyond this was something new to here. I think even there was some changes in the construction field through the local codes where we have to adopt this long cylinder buildings because our codes were not, when we started this thing, it wasn't customized to this. Now they have added more flexibility and put more rules to the code to suit this development. There is a huge growth, especially in hospitality sector and the retail sector. I can see a number of brands right now from the hotel operators are being interested in the market, building new hotels, refurbishing their existing hotel, or trying to acquire a hotel which is operated by a different brand right now and doing this regular thing of refurbishment to match and suit their brand. So from a bigger perspective, I think there is a big potential now for investors who are never interested to join the country because there is a movement, especially with all the infrastructure done during the last couple of years. New roads, new metro lines, new monorails. I think now you can, if you are landing in Cairo, you can just go, I would say within the next 2 to 3 years from Cairo, you can go anywhere in Egypt through either a metro or a monorail or a high-speed train. So the transportation and connection thing, it's also establishing and moving very rapidly and very fast. This will solve a number of logistics and supply chain issues indeed.
The other kind of observation to make is that Egypt tends to be developed all around the Nile. Is there any plans and efforts, because you've got this massive land which is kind of fairly underdeveloped? Is there kind of a drive from the government looking at, maybe moving populations further, I guess, to the west, if you like, of the Nile, developing new cities or infrastructure that they are still connected?
Yeah, see, the plan now is to have the area around the Nile to be something, a pedestrian friendly areas. There is something called Mamsha Ahl Masr, which is the walk of Egyptian people or Egypt people. It's a long running track and long moving walking track with all the, I would say, artwork and other funny things to have a big, in total it will be something like 18 kilometers. And the plan, 2 phases are completed, and the plan to have this from Cairo to Aswan, which is the last city in Egypt borders between us and Sudan. This is a big project. The other things, they are moving now all the governmental offices and buildings to the new administrative capital. And this was the aim from day one. So what will happen is Tahrir Square, which is the famous, where they have this old museum. I think everybody have seen moving the mummies from this one, this event for moving the mummies from this one to the new one. But this area will be developed and there will be a big number of developments there. There is a triangle called Maspero Triangle, which they are developing right now. This will be something like the Dubai Marina, if you want to compare it to where people can familiarize. And the plan is to have other areas in the opposite side to benefit from this Nile view and other touristic view to maximize, as I said, mainly the touristic things, and asking other investors and foreign investors to come and join offices. rather than building offices in different countries. Why? Okay, you can have a nice office looking to the Nile. It's a great view if you are working from your office and having this view on a daily basis.
And what was you mentioned now working from the office, which immediately made me think about working from home. What has the impact been in the construction sector over the last 18 months with the whole pandemic? What did you see? Was there a slowdown significant? Has it recovered? Are we back on track?
On the start of the pandemic, as every country had, we had a slowdown for the first, I would say, between March of last year and May to June. And then we realized, like everyone else in the world, that this is not a special event for a couple of months. This is something which will last for a longer period, 3 to 4 years, until everybody gets vaccinated and sorted and finds proper solutions for this one. So with the proper precautionary measures, all the sites are working now, taking all the safety requirements. I think what happened is that there have been a new introduction to the contracts to add clauses and add sections about precautionary measures, safety measures, and regulation to suit the COVID situation on the construction market, and how to deal with labors, rest areas, open areas, gatherings, and others. But now, I would say since end of last year, the construction is going into its normal situation, taking all safety and precautionary measures. It's actually booming now. I think there is a huge number of projects that have been tendered and about to start construction within this quarter and next quarter.
Fantastic. So just I put a slide up here in terms of just the projects by sector that we track in Egypt. And you can see the biggest sector is what we call construction, which is effectively your real estate sector.
Yeah, buildings.
That is correct. And by far the biggest, 155 billion. You mentioned about 200 billion. Okay, but we can then add on power and water, oil and gas, as well as transportation infrastructure. So, that take us, to well over, close to the $300 billion mark in terms of active projects in Egypt. So I guess linking this back to the economy, how is this being paid for?
It's some of the, let's focus on the construction sector, for example. I think it started with the government financing part of this, a big part, which is the iconic tower and others. And then once this, for example, in the EU capital, it's populated and it have been promoted and marketed well, then there is a huge interest now from local developers and foreign developers to obtain pieces of land and start developing it themselves. So I think the government have now, what they've done is they established a new company called New Administrative Capital, Real Estate and Urban Development, and they start to sold lots of lands with development plan, with the master scheme of development plan. So they have split the area, the master plan done by one of the most famous architects in the world, and there is an area for business sectors, business parks, area for towers, area for residential, area for hospitality. So a big master scheme for mixed-use development. And now each developer is taking his own way through sales, equities, finance, institutions, and others to finance his own project. But it was the government, and now it's being distributed to a larger scheme and scale of people.
So just to recap, my understanding is that the government kind of set up the master plan, and then they bring in kind of private sector developers then that will take certain sections, and then they will obviously develop those independently with their own finance and obviously their own schedule in terms of how they deliver that.
Exactly. And power and water and transportation, it's a build, operate, and transfer thing, which is common. And some of the other projects in the transportation, like the Nile taxi, for example, is PPP. It's a partnership between the private and public sector. So there's a huge diversity between the forms of contracts and forms of agreement to suit and match each and every one. But generally, it's moving very rapidly, as I said, especially on the construction. As you see, this is 50% of what is happening right now. Massive, massive developments.
Real estate. What about on the industrial side? I mean, because Egypt is actually quite a powerhouse when it comes to on the industrial side as well. Manufacturing, we know, even in the food sector, food processing sector, there's massive industries there. Again, linking back to the economy, is there a focus or a drive to develop Egypt or that sector specifically? to attract foreign investment from a manufacturing point of view. I think from my perspective, the COVID has actually highlighted an opportunity where it seemed to be a very large dependence on Far East to provide a lot of the materials or components that's used in the West for assembly, which we saw that a year ago. Suddenly with the lockdown, it became unavailable, and we're still feeling the repercussions of that supply chain imbalance, kind of oscillating and still not stabilized. So is there anything being done actively in terms of promoting investment in the industrial sector?
Yeah, for example, let's go for the construction, which is a big chunk of my job. We have a lot of queries for marbles and granite and others. So what the government have do now is they have establishment Galala city, which is somewhere in the road to Hurghada, which is a famous city. It's a very big query. Have put a big number of machinery equipment to use this to develop in local and export the marble from there to other countries. So it's not only a plan to self finance this one and self-provide it to our country. It's also the bigger plan is to export it. So rather than having to depend only on Far East, as you said, and other countries, what is now the government is trying to do is to promote for the industrial things, give a lot of flexibility to the factory owners from different sectors to basically start self-sustain what we need in here. So we became a bit independent on some of the supply chains, or at least support a big chunk of our needs locally, and then look to the bigger scheme and start exporting this to other countries to find a parallel market. Because we suddenly, during this, discovered that there is a number of things which we import, and when it stopped, we didn't feel it, but when it stopped, okay, guys, there's a big problem. We need to become, once we became self-isolated, it became a big problem. I think the biggest thing happening right now is the ECUs for the cars. Because of the shortage, there is a big actually shortage in the supply for most of the factories. And a number of car companies are actually now having to reduce their production lines, the number of cars they are producing on a monthly basis because of this shortage in ECUs.
Okay, very good. Sorry, I'm just going to stop my screen because it seemed to have got a bit of a glitch there. By the way, I just saw a couple of questions coming through, and I thought that it might be an opportune time to ask anybody watching out there, if you have anything for either myself or for John, please put it on, and we will either comment on it here, or we will send a reply afterwards. The event is being recorded and will be available on YouTube as well, along with the presentation. So do not feel like you have to take any urgent notes. We will share this as well. Right, so just going back to sorry, there's some of the slides here. Just get that open again. So just looking at some of the top project that we have at the moment, we've got specific in the plan stage is about $46 billion, design 67 billion, currently being tendered about 6.6 billion, fairly diverse in terms of, this polypropylene. I think there was a question just asked about that plant specifically. And then, power and rail is clearly quite active. And then, under construction, massive 215 billion projects under construction, which I think, John, you alluded to in the beginning as well. So is there any of the projects that you're involved with now that stands out as iconic to you, that you think is going to have the biggest impact on society in general? What is something that's going to change the way Egypt or Cairo, operates it from today, once completed?
I think the biggest one is we will go for the infrastructure. This metro lines and Alexandria Metro and other one would relate to the metro and transportation in general is creating this. And I think within the next couple of years, it will make a different Cairo and a different Egypt in general, because you'll be able to move easily into a clean and very good and cheap public transportation method between all the places without the need of a car and long time to travel. So traffic jams and other will not impact you while you are sitting in the metro, for example, and moving for 200 kilometers between one city to the other. It's going to be a great thing versus normal procedures of using your car or using somewhere else. So I think this will also help to promote for an area like the new capital.
Yeah.
Will be able to easily become located anywhere in Cairo and move to the new capital, which is, I would say, 50 or 60 kilometers out of Cairo, outside of normal Cairo limits, versus using your car and spending a huge number of time. So you'll not be driving, you'll just be moving. So this will make people and actually move faster and enable people to work there. The plan will be working because doing this makes the plan more feasible versus the initial thoughts that, okay, why I will go, which is a normal trend in everywhere, why I will go to take a flat, for example, or move to work on a remote area like this one. It's easy, just stay anywhere. You will spend the normal time you're doing traveling inside Cairo to just move to a place where actually it's well master planned and well design planned.
I think you're absolutely right, and also that I think something that stands out from any great countries where there's significant investment or foreign investment into those markets from companies and industries is good transportation infrastructure exists. So I guess this is something that's been recognized by the government, and they are clearly implementing and developing this. Moving on, just looking at top developers, there is the Administrative Capital for Urban Development, which you mentioned. So they are by far our largest developer. We've got the Ministry, Electricity and Transport, which we've mentioned as well. Housing as well, affordable housing. What is that market like in Cairo? Because I would imagine that there is a certain need, although I mean accommodation, I'm not sure whether that is there a deficit, and is how big is the need for affordable housing in Cairo or in Egypt?
There is a big need for this one. I think there is a number of massive development which have been done right now. Places which I'm happy if any one of the attendees want me, I can share the links later. They can email me. There is places where it's just shifted from an unplanned areas to a very, very well-planned areas with actually they took the people. What they done, the government have just took the people, put them in a temporary location, demolished the area in total, replan it, construct it into different through different contracts, and put the people back with very minimal amount of money is needed, and sometimes at free of cost. So you discover that you became suddenly moving from an area where 3 floors or something with non-standard finishes and poor infrastructure, like there is no supply of water or wastewater or somewhere like this, to very well constructed building with all the connected. So and I would say a good finishing quality inside as well. The government, yeah, the Egyptian government, the Egyptian president have opened a couple of this during the last couple of years, and it's all recorded. And he is even went through the flats and the apartments himself to check how the people like it, and it actually was received very well from the people here.
Indeed. Maybe just a question in terms of what is the focus or the Egyptian, you mentioned the codes or the law construction codes when it comes to environmentally friendly materials and practices. Is that something that's been adopted? And how important is that in terms of the overall construction market?
There is now a huge marketing campaigns, and there is a huge awareness about the sustainability and the requirements. Some of the developers in the private sector are now trying to achieve LEED certificates for their project on different grades, either certified, silver, gold, and platinum. They put this now into their master plan and feasibility models to see what is the impact of this from a cost perspective to account for it. And the good thing as well, which is some of the people might not know, we have a sustainability system actually in the country. It's called the Green Pyramid system, which some of the local developers use to put in their feasibility model. So there is a standard Egyptian system to get your building certified through a sustainability one called the Green Permit. I can say that compared, let's say, to 5 years back, there is a huge awareness about this sustainability issue, especially with things that are arising from the shortage of water, shortage of the world supply, for the supply chain requirements, food and others. So now, okay, people became more aware. Okay, guys, I don't think we just should continue using the resources this way. Let's think about another way to use our current resources, because we need to maintain these resources for the next generations.
Yes.
Have the right to live afterwards. So, okay, let's focus to do this right now to increase the benefit of this sustainable constructions. I have seen projects actually using gray water to do the irrigation, using recycled water and treated water for the huge irrigation, using different species, for example, in the landscaping, which is not that water eating, fast eating things. There is a huge parameters now, even selecting materials where the life cycle of it is much longer, or at the end of this, it can be disposed in a safer way versus the normal product we are using right now. So I think the market is growing, but there is still a big potential for it to grow. I think we are not there yet, but we are moving towards the right direction.
Right, very good. So my next question from that is, and I'm so glad that you are a QS by background. So what is the impact of this on cost?
It adds a cost to the capex for the original establishment of the project, which is something I think most of the developers, when we give them this,
don't like.
They don't like it in the beginning. It's actually have a very positive impact on the OpEx side, which is the operational side. So when we start to discuss this with some of the developers, we prefer to have both sides sitting, especially if they are splitting the teams between operational and construction people. So guys, you just need to know you are not paying an extra 100,000 now. You will save $1 million in the next 2 years, for example, or the next 3 years. So, okay, you're be adding 1 or 2% now to your construction cost or capex, but you will save later. So just don't look to it like this way. Let's run the whole feasibility model and look to the whole life cycle costing of the project.
Is there any incentives provided for by the government to go down this route? I mean, is there any tax write-offs or credits that they can get if they go down the lead qualification route?
It is being promoted, and I think there is a discussion right now on how to reward some of these projects. I am not yet aware of the final conclusion of this one, but I hear the government are now thinking of ways to reward the developers who are sticking to sustainability requirements, in particularly of water consumptions, power consumptions. Because with development right now, we're now having a surplus of power, I would say. And there is a plan for the government to continue doing this to feed the next future plan for the, I would say, 5 to 10 years now, or some power plants being developed right now will serve for the next 20 years. But again, they realize that there could be a massive scheme coming afterwards. So the plan is to promote some, I would say, incentives for the developers sticking to the lowest requirement of maintaining a sustainable requirement of this one.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. I do know that Egypt has fairly recently started exporting power as well to South Sudan, or sorry, to Sudan, not South Sudan, across the border. So, I mean, that I think fortunately the country is fairly surrounded by a lot of other markets that is in need of or do have a deficit of power and need the extra capacity. Just looking at the contractors, so we've got some local obviously players that are massive across the continent. Actually, if you look at comparing Arab contractors, look at their workload, Orascom as well, across the continent, they are massive. They are still one of the biggest players, I think. What is the interesting thing on this list is you can see in the 5th place there we've got China Civil Engineering. So the interesting comment here is, what is the opportunity for foreign contractors in Egypt? Is there an opportunity?
There is a big opportunity, I would say.
So And how does the market feel about it? They are happy to accept international players into that market. I know some of the UAE contractors that has just gone into partnership agreements in Egypt as well, specifically on the fit out side. This is, but nonetheless, do you believe that opportunity? Do you see there's massive workload of projects coming? We saw that how many billion is under development or prior execution or pre-execution. Can the local contractors do they have the capacity to take on all this new work? Is there a need for international players to come into this market?
I think there is a need because it's not about the problems now about the supply and demand. There is a huge demand for construction projects in different sectors, and there is, I would say, we are now became on a limited supply thing. So the contractors are having a big workload log. So I'm meeting some of the, for example, in tender sessions, some of the same contractors, I'm meeting them a couple of times or 3 times in a day. And each time he can assure me that he has the capacity to run the project. Yeah, I think the first and second time, but not the third time, because if you get the 3 together, this is going to be a crazy problem who's well established. So the thing, yeah, I think there is a big opportunity for foreign contractors, especially that some of these contractors already are doing alliances and GVs with local contractors, where they can work together in essence to either establish a modern construction technology, modern method of construction, or develop their teams to adopt some of the works and techniques, especially on the construction sector for works and others, like what China State have done in the iconic tower, for example, to speed up the process. People coming from the Gulf, especially, there is some couple of or 3-4 contractors I don't want to mention their names, but they have established their own offices in here and start to take projects in the new capital, in the New Cairo area, West Cairo. There is potential. There is a big need, actually, I would say, and there is a golden opportunity for people to use it right now. Either start establishing their own offices in here, own firms, or start doing alliances with smaller contractor and try to develop together to become a big one of the companies. Because some of these names, actually, if you go back, for example, China Civil Engineering, a couple of years back, it wasn't that massive.
Yeah,
as after a couple of the big names in Egypt, which is well established for a number of years. So yes, there is a huge opportunity for people to come to Egypt and do alliances or do their own companies and start growing.
I'm not sure if you would be able to shed light on this one, but just for interest sake, do you have an idea of how long would it take? If I get on a plane tomorrow flying into Cairo, how long before my company will be operational?
Establishing the company here now is a process becoming online and automated with this digital transformation thing for the government, where you can just plug your ID, national ID number, and find everything there, or your passport number. It generally can take between, on average, 3 months. I would say you can form your own company because you need to make sure that there is a commercial register in place, as a requirement, a place to find, I think, which is the hardest, find the right place you will be located in. So I would say if someone is coming to here, renting a place between 3 to 6 months, he can have an established company. If he's doing a GV, it's a different game at all, because he can just start.
It'll be quicker.
Yeah, it will be quicker. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic, excellent. All right, so we've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to exit this slide share, and then I think I'm just want to see if I can list some of these questions. Let's maybe see if we can answer some of those. So tire petrochemical complex will be moving ahead. So they mentioned it's a $7.5 billion contract. Are you aware of this project at all, Tahrir Petrochemical Complex?
I'm aware of it, but unfortunately, I'm not deeply involved in this one.
With that.
Yeah, so
that's fine.
As we understood, it's moving from the news and some of the sources, but the details of this one is not yet announced.
Published or known. Good. We'll definitely come back to the person who asked the question. We will look at our database and come back with a response on that one as well. So is there any consideration of green building and advancing net zero in projects? I think we kind of addressed that already.
There is,
we kind of spoke about that in terms of LEED certification and possible incentives by the government. The next one is how much super luxury construction is done. Everybody's talking about the army controlling major projects. This is affecting the reputation of the country. Well, the question, it is a question, does it affect the reputation? I don't think so. I think you can see it's not deterring anybody coming there. And what is the country doing to make sure that projects are awarded to, well, I don't know who deserves it, to find that. I mean, I think it's about the best company for the job, I would imagine. So any views on that?
Yeah, the process, okay, it started by the army, but it's not the army, it's other entities, but it was managed by the army because it was new development and pieces of land where it's remote or isolated, like New Alamein City and New Capital City. But the now, if you look to the master plan, for example, for the Alamein City or the new administrative capital, it's actually developed by private sector developers. And tenders are going through competitive tendering, with a few exceptions in areas like the iconic tower, for example. But it's competitive tendering everywhere. So the contractor win technically commercial. So there is, I don't think there is a risk of repetition here, because you're dealing with a normal tendering process, a normal selection process with local developers. There is no, nobody's forcing this local developer to use someone in particular. It's a competitive tendering process, very transparent, and two different procurement routes, but the best contractor win at the end of the day.
Excellent. Is there a clear vision for the environment zero emissions? Again, I think we have answered this one already. Okay, here's a question. What is the outlook in the water sector in Egypt? I mean, I think water is a very contentious issue in Egypt. You've got the Nile, and very, very famously, we've got the Renaissance Dam just south of the border, well, going into Ethiopia. So, I mean, that is obviously something that's going on at the moment. So, in terms of, you've got limited freshwater supply, then I guess the next one is wells and desalination are the options. So I imagine the demand, rebuilding everything new, and like you mentioned before, demolishing all sectors in the city or in the area. There's both sides of or two sides to the argument, but certainly you would limit a lot of wastage of old infrastructure that has got a certain percentage of leakage, which you're now rebuilding with new infrastructure where you can reduce that. But I guess you'll know more about what is the demand.
The government have started a national project to line a number of canals right now and water channels, because the loss of evaporation in these areas in particular were huge. So by doing this, what is happening right now is that this is creating a more saving water on the agriculture side of things, and also they start to promote the awareness, or enhance the awareness of people about the Nile is there. We could be surprised it's not there for that long, or there is a shortage of the supply we're having. So, okay, if you are doing small things in your house, even on a domestic perspective, this could save X amount of water through advertising on the national TV and others. And bigger projects, going to a larger scale, bigger projects on agriculture, and finding alternatives way of, let's say, treating some of the gray waters to use it in irrigations and others. There is a number of, I think now, lines which the government is moving to solve it, besides a parallel route of discussing the water supply in general with other parties and other countries. So I think it's a bit itchy part at that time, but I think we will finally find a way. I don't think, to be very honest, that the world now can sustain such a big problem. So it will be solved. My personal belief is that it will be solved somehow in the near future.
Absolutely, agree with that.
Turn into a big problem, which I think the major companies like the states and others does not favor this one, and there is a huge move now to try to contribute to solve this.
Indeed. Let's move on to just another question that came in about the Red Sea refinery, and they talk about another new refinery in Al Amin. I'm not sure if you're aware or got any knowledge on that. We can again come back to that
one. And yeah, I think Egypt can afford a new refinery in Al Amin because it's a massive city. If people are interested, just go to Google Maps and look to it. It's massive now. There is 4 iconic towers connected together from the top through a walking bridge, and you will be able, I think, once this is completed, to sit in the swimming pool and overlook the Mediterranean Sea, which will be something of worth watching. Yeah, I'm actually very proud of the government moves in the last years, because we are trying to learn from others and see what is attracting people, let's say, to major destinations like Dubai, Malaysia, Singapore, and trying to simulate it here. We have the natural resources to do that, so why we don't use it? So I think we can afford another new refinery in Al Amin. This needs to be discussed on a more bigger scheme of our small webinar, but yeah, in this area in particular, I think with the massive construction happening, because it's not only Al Amin, it's this north coast line is a coastal line between Alexandria and a city called Marsa Matruh on the borders of Libya. So there is a number of places being developed, Sidi Hnish, Ras Al Hikma, and others. So I would say there is a massive development.
I think we lost a bit of sound there. John, we can't hear you there.
Can you still hear me?
There we go. Okay, you're back. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm saying, yeah, no problem. I'm saying that this, it's not only Al Amin city. This north coastal line is a massive line which includes billions of kilometers to be developed, and a number of developers are working to do it right now. So there could be a new refinery there because it will be needed.
Well, yes, Mediterranean is prime location. Yeah, you've got all the north coast, and I know they're looking at metro and rail that's going to be developed, connecting all of those cities as well. So I think it's clearly maybe link back to the conversation we had about spreading population, not just all along the Nile, but other areas that's viable across the country. Right, so I think there's a comment here about, you mentioned the links to affordable housing, and people want to share it. So maybe if you could just send it to me or to...
Yeah, I'll send it to you immediately after the webinar, yeah.
Excellent, and we will obviously share this with everybody as well. Okay, I'm not sure about that one.
I know what this is.
Diesel bus. You know what
I can answer this. Yeah.
Very good.
I think he's speaking about the sustainability efforts on the country. So yeah, correct. And I think the government now have reopened the Nasr transportation and automotive factory, and they on a JV with a Chinese company to produce electrical cars in Egypt. And I think the plan is going forward to produce also electrical public transportation. So
buses replacing
the way of going green. Yeah, there is a direction to go green.
Excellent, fantastic. Right, so we've done that one. What is the impact? Total power supply.
Okay. We now, as I said during the webinar, we have a surplus of power. We're exporting to Sudan. So basically, we have plans also to grow on the power sector in particular. There is a number of new power planets and a Dab'a nuclear planet to produce electrical power as well. So I don't think there is an impact. I think we can now, with the master plan we have, supply power for all these projects. And with actually the development part of the water and power, we can still supply for the future project. So it's not just, there is not just a development of suddenly we are developing a project with no supply of power and water to it. We're actually doing this in parallel.
Okay, that's good. Next question, there is water project in the Toshka area. a 500-kilometer pipeline. Is that, I assume, is that bringing in fresh water? Are you aware of that one?
Unfortunately, I'm aware about the project, but unfortunately, I'm not aware about the details of this one, but I can get back later.
That's fine. We will have a look into that, and then we can respond directly about that project. Right, so contract and consultants, I'm not sure exactly what they're referring to, but maybe I suspect it's some of the lists that we looked at, the big players in the market. So we will again share some of our intelligence on that, but we can do that after the event as well. I think the last question that we're going to address here before we move on is civil defense certification from Egypt mandatory for fire-related products to enter an ongoing project in Egypt.
It's mandatory to comply with the civil defense requirement. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in this area.
I would imagine.
But I know that you will be, if you are establishing a company to a vendor to supply firefighting products, I think you need to approve pre-samples or get from a specified manufacturer complying with local requirements and local codes. Itself, maybe we can dig it in more details if needed with the guy who asked him the question.
Good. We will certainly go back to them as well. So I think that's kind of addresses most of the questions that we've gone through. I think what I would like to do is just maybe go a bit of a benchmark just to bring a bit more context in terms of the Egypt market. So one of the things that we do, obviously this is now live on our website, is the ability where we can just filter for Egyptian market, looking at financiers for ongoing upcoming projects. In this case, just looking at who's the major players. So, we've got the top 20 companies here, looking at, by value, number one. So the nice thing is that instantaneously, what is the market share of these players based on your filter or set of filter requirements. And we can quickly go into, so surprisingly for me is that we've got a lot of work from the US. So the Export-Import Bank out of the US is involved in quite a number of projects, to the extent that it's the second largest financier in Egypt, and obviously government of Russia. I mean, we all know that's kind of the nuclear plant. I don't think that's a surprise there. But just going through the list, we've got Korea, we've got Italian, Korean, again, National Bank of Egypt, Bank Misr, then China's civil engineering. So obviously they're doing self-financing on projects. European Investment Bank, the DFC, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So I think overall a fairly diverse portfolio in terms of where investment is coming from. It's kind of east-west, or a good balance there, which from my point of view, there's no domination of one single area or region in the world. It's fairly diverse and a lot of players in that market. If we just look at the by number of projects, now we can see obviously it must be a bunch of or a lot of smaller projects that's being funded by the European Investment Bank, because they're now number one. But again, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So suddenly the European two banks are number one and two, just based on number of projects that they're involved with. I think one of the things that I'd like to quickly just do is just to bring a bit of a context there and just say, well, let's just go and look at Africa overall to see how Egypt stacks up. And then just say, all right, let's select Africa here. I'm going to go all sectors, and then just look at, how does it look if we look at the top, by sector and also by market, to see who the top players are. And I think, the first view here is let's maybe go here and look at the stages to get an idea in terms of size. So we had Egypt there of about 300 billion. But I think the interesting thing here to note is if you look at the size of the overall African market, so there's $1.6 trillion of active projects, of which close to $936 billion is under construction, compared to Egypt that's already over 200 billion. So sizable there in terms of comparison. If we look at it just look at who the main players are, and irrespective of their role, it's just, they're associated either as a contractor or a developer. But the interesting thing, well, or maybe not surprisingly, is actually that you have the African Development Bank as one of the biggest players. And this is now all of Africa, it's not just sub-Saharan, it includes North and South. And if you look at by number of projects there, that's the interesting one for me. If you look at count and activity, the most active is actually Arab Contractors, which is the Egyptian-based company. And I've mentioned that before. And it's not that they're not just number one by a small margin. They by a big margin. They almost double the number of value.
They are one of the oldest established companies in here, and exactly. Have expanded in Africa since early 80s. So they are not just new to the African market. It's a massive construction. They are almost everywhere. They have also a big number of subsidiaries covering most of the construction sectors in different areas. Yeah.
So again, massive. It's very interesting to read and go through this. If we go through the different countries as well now, so let's look at all of Africa. And as I mentioned before, no surprise. Most active or the biggest construction pot there is actually Egypt. We've got a total list there of over $400 billion worth of projects, followed by Nigeria, South Africa, and Angola. It's kind of the big main markets you would expect. Angola, obviously a major player on both mining and oil and gas. So those projects tends to be fairly large. If you just look at number of projects, though, Egypt still by far number one, but then still, 1 and 2 is the same. But then you have Kenya picking up. So obviously smaller projects, but lots of them coming out of the Kenyan market. Beating Nigeria actually in the third place there. Looking at what sectors are the most, active. Let's just look at, how does that compare? Then construction across Africa by far the biggest. So kind of your real estate work, followed by energy. So power, which is kind of expected. You have for sub-Saharan Africa on average, only 45% of those countries has got access to power, or people in sub-Saharan Africa has got access to power, which is improving, year on year dramatically, but still lagging. Transport infrastructure, ports, roads, bridges, rail is a big player now. We see a lot in West Africa, East Africa, and North Africa as well. I mean, obviously Egypt, it's a massive sector. Oil and gas, industrial water, so you can go through there if we look at just by number of projects. So if we look at just based on value of projects though, then oil and gas, the biggest. And again, that's the size of those, you've got in Mozambique and Angola, some of those offshore and onshore developments are, literally double-digit billions. So massive projects in general there. I think something that is quite interesting that we like to look at as well, we spoke about drivers across different countries. And that for me is looking at forecast, so population about in Egypt. So, and I think maybe a better example would be if we just, let me just move this away a bit and then look at this benchmark report. So over here, just looking at, based on GDP, number one to the ranking across the African continent, GDP, biggest market, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Egypt, 1, 2, 3, and I just plugged them down here at the bottom. And then we can look at GDP growth and see how that changes, So based on growth, we've got different markets. So we've got Rwanda, Ethiopia, Djibouti as being the fastest growing markets based on the GDP. And bear in mind, this is 2019 numbers. 2020 should be available fairly shortly. And then just looking at growth in terms of metrics down here below. And you can see South Africa, 0 growth 2019 and so on. If we look at population, that's the interesting thing for me in terms of drivers, because we have massive populations now, it's going to grow. 1, 2, 3, you've got Nigeria, Ethiopia, Egypt, and then DRC. And I think the interesting thing here is if we start putting this forward, let's just look at by 2050, so let's say about 29 years from now, does that change? So now you have Nigeria, Ethiopia, DRC, and Egypt has dropped back a bit, but I think still a big number. Considering Egypt is just over 100 million people now, close to 160 million in 28 years. It's still massive growth, and all that, all of those people need, places to stay, places to go, food to eat. The impact for additional 60
offices, malls, hotels, everything.
Yeah, that's the point, and it's 29 years. It's not a long time. 29 years go by like that, in the biggest scheme of things. But I think interesting, if you just look at it, those 3 countries compared to the rest of Africa, if you look at Africa, it's 80. So close to 21% of the continent's population just sits in those 3 markets. And South Africa is a small one actually by comparison. But just look at, Egypt and Nigeria, and you can see obviously Nigeria is behemoth. It's, to 400 million people by 2050, a massive market. The other one that's for me is interesting. I always like to look at just looking at the risk perspective, you know, talking about where do you want to go in terms of investment, how safe is it? And then looking at these three markets, we obviously rank all of Africa. So safest would be Botswana, and I guess the least would be Somalia, which I guess is no surprise there. But just looking at our three benchmark countries there, we have Nigeria at 34, South Africa at number 2, and then Egypt at number 20. So it's unfortunately, it's 2019 rank, it's kind of dropped a couple of spots there from 16 to 20. And that's, you know, just based on all the metrics that we use. We look at health and business environment and security and corruption and so on. You know, that's still not, you know, it's above the 50% mark if you look at it in terms of the continent. So a reasonable, safe country to still go in and invest in. And then I think the other one, which, and we're going to have an event in September looking specifically at PPP, because that's is another question. What do you see in terms of, because PPP is a method of finance at the end of the day, and it's a way you procure and develop your project. Do you see that as a significant, or do you see a significant uptake in PPP, considering that Egypt just recently established the PPP unit under the Ministry of Finance? Have you seen a lot coming out of that yet?
Yeah, during the last, I would say, couple of years, there was initiative for projects, PPP, like doing this Nile taxi, which is you just use water taxis going from some place to other, moving across the line, something like an Uber, but inside the Nile, which is a good thing. And now we see a big movement through this sector and through this sort of procurement and tendering process in particular, because it's beneficial to both parties. You can get benefits from the facilitation you will get through being having a public sector involved in the equation, and the experience and knowledge, and I would say the better management coming from experienced people of the private sector with all this know-how and experience contributing to the process. So this mix is actually a good thing, and there is a strong direction to move with it forward. In some of the new projects, which is coming with a particular need of experience, which I wouldn't say Egypt might have, but Egypt is still growing in it. So why we don't use people who have the better knowledge of it and with our people? So at the end of the day, it's a win-win situation. We will learn, they will benefit from it, and get a situation where everybody gets his fair share of the game.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear, and hopefully we will have you and maybe some of your PPP colleagues out here in Dubai in September. I'm going to have one last question that I'm going to address before we end. And this question relates to codes in Egypt. Is that influenced more from an American standards point of view or European standards? Is there one that it's aligned with?
Yeah, actually both. For example, let's go for, I'm a civil engineer by graduation. So going to the Egyptian code for buildings, concrete in particular, it can refer you back to the ACI, which is the American code, or the PS, which is a British. Then it's also accepted, which is German. So anything which is complying with the requirements, it's a performance specs versus a thing. So if you can, prove that what you are doing is safe and complying with the local regulation, I would say there is a bit of flexibility to move it. You can use German codes, British codes, American codes, European codes. It will pass as long as it meets the minimum requirements and standards in the local codes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I've got to say, John, this was fantastic. I really enjoyed our session. We had a lot of questions and addressed a lot of questions, and I've learned a lot from you as well. So thank you very much for that. I hope to have you back on a future session looking at Egypt, hopefully in the near future. But I wish you all the best and all the all the success with all the projects you're involved with, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emil. Looking forward to actually being part of your firm webinars in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. Have a nice day. Take care.
Same to you. Cheers. Bye.